In episode 1 of The Night Agent, you get introduced to Peter. He's an FBI agent, but he's got an interesting past. His dad was an FBI agent, a disgraced one. He was labeled a traitor, and before he could clear his name, he was killed in a car accident. Because of this, Peter's always kind of had an eye on him, because some people think that he might be just like his dad, a traitor, especially when he thwarts a bombing on the DC Metro. He noticed a guy get on, put a book bag on, and get off. He looked in the book bag out of curiosity, and there was a bomb there. He saved probably 100 people, but some conspiracy theory whack jobs think that he had something to do with it. While the police were checking on everybody that day, he did notice a suspicious figure, and Peter chased after him, but the guy ended up getting away. The only discernible thing he noticed about the guy was this giant snake tattoo. Maybe the only good thing to come of that day was the fact that it got some people in Peter's corner. Diane Farr, the president's chief of staff, really likes Peter. She's kind of been a mentor to him, looking out for him. But in order to get promoted, he needs the deputy director of the FBI, a guy named Jamie Hawkins, to sign off on it. And Jamie isn't the biggest Peter fan. It's not like he has a problem with him, he just doesn't like how close he is with Diane. So for the last year, after thwarting this attack, Peter has been biding his time, paying his dues, and sitting in a windowless room in the White House, going over reports while staring at a phone that never rings. It's basically a break glass for emergency type of situation. As Peter is going over the reports on one unsuspicious day, out in the DC suburbs, a woman named Rose is waiting outside of her aunt and uncle's place for them to arrive. They're just getting back from Rome. Rose is down on her luck. She was the CEO and founder of a very, very successful tech startup. It had to do with cybersecurity. But they had malware issues, all of her clients bailed, and the board of directors fired her. So she kind of needs a place to lay low because she's broke. She's had to file for bankruptcy. Her aunt and uncle reassure her that she can stay there as long as she wants. And in that moment, it's exactly what she needed. But the first night she's there, she wakes up in the middle of the night to a little bit of commotion downstairs. And when she checks her phone, it's weird because there's no service. There's also no power. She starts to make her way out of her room and downstairs, and she can faintly hear her aunt and uncle talking. They start talking about burning some documents, finishing a job, and warning somebody named Osprey that they're, quote, coming for them. Her uncle also mentions that it's 7 days before they try again, and then they start talking about some files. Her aunt says that they need to use these files to warn people that no one in the White House can be trusted. Rose continues to make her way downstairs, listening to this conversation about warning someone named Osprey, a drive in the woods, destroying everything that's there. And then Rose interrupts their conversation. And when they hear something, her aunt whips around and puts a gun in her face, thinking that she's an intruder. This side of her aunt is something that Rose has never seen before, so she's a little freaked out. Both her aunt and uncle weren't planning on Rose being up, but now that she is, they need to warn her. They try to explain to her that this is going to be really hard to comprehend, but there are two people outside and they're coming after them. Her uncle hands her a piece of paper and says, "Take this. Go to the house down the hill, use their phone, call this number, say these words. Night action. Tell them we need help." Rose doesn't understand, but her aunt says, "You don't need to understand. You just need to go." Rose then does what she's told. She sneaks out the back door and heads down to the house, down the street. Nobody's home. She's able to break in, use the cell phone, and she calls that number. And that number goes to the room that Peter is located in. That number calls the phone that never rings. Rose tells him night action. She starts to follow the directions that her uncle wrote down, but she doesn't know the answers to all of Peter's questions. Because this number is really for people in the know, and Rose isn't in the know. She's just terrified and scared. Peter's actually about to hang up when Rose begs him not to, pleading with him to help her because her aunt and uncle are in danger. Even though he is supposed to follow protocol, Peter ends up helping her, calling the police and making sure that they head to the location of the house. There is one big issue, though. While Rose was leaving, she saw one of the assassin's faces, and he saw her, and he's after her. He's tracked her to the house down the hill, and he's slowly coming for her. Peter does his best to try to talk Rose through this situation, creating diversions just to stall until the police show up. And it gets pretty dicey, but these diversions do work. The police do show up, It scares off the assassin, and he ends up fleeing. Now, anytime that there's a night action, Peter is to call his boss. In this case, it's Diane. He fills Diane on everything that happened, and the fact that the woman on the line said her aunt and uncle, Emma and Henry Campbell, were in danger. After he fills Diane on everything that he got from his end of the conversation, she says, "You have to go pick up the witness. Take this woman somewhere and don't tell anyone where you're going." Peter tells Diane that Hawkins is already on his way, but she gets even more concerned when she hears that. At this point, she doesn't really trust him. She only seems to trust Peter, and she wants him on this job. So Peter heads out to intercept Rose and hopefully take her to safety. And when he arrives, Rose is already talking to Hawkins. Unfortunately, Hawkins has to inform Rose that her aunt and uncle have been killed. Rose is especially confused because she had no idea that her aunt and uncle would be involved in something that A, could get them killed, but B, that would require a response from people from the FBI and the White House. She's leery of just about everybody, including Peter when he shows up, even though she recognizes Peter's voice from the other line of the phone. When Pete does show up, Hawkins is pissed off. He doesn't like the fact that Diane is kind of stepping on his toes a little bit, but Diane got approval from the president. There's nothing Hawkins can do except sit back and let Pete just take the witness away. Before Pete can take her somewhere safe, he has to stop at his apartment first. On the way over to his apartment, Rose is just trying to make sense of all this. For her whole life, she thought her aunt and uncle were in acquisitions, but now that's all been turned upside down and they're dead. She's kind of looking for Pete to give her some insight as to what's going on, but Pete doesn't know. And he was instructed by Diane to not reveal any information and not get any information until they go through a debriefing in the morning. Because Pete was the one that answered the call, she thinks he knows more than he does. And he tries to explain to her, "I'm sitting in a windowless room in front of a phone that never rings. I don't know anything. I'm low on the totem pole." When they eventually get to his apartment, he takes her phone to make sure they're not being tracked. He then sets up a hidden camera, so while they're away, he can keep tabs on if anyone's inside, and then they head back to his car. As they're walking to it, though, Pete notices that two guys have gotten out of a vehicle and they're walking towards them, and he gets pretty suspicious. He's able to get the jump on both of them, and he kicks the crap out of them. He wants to know why they're after her, and they say, "We're not after her, we're after you." Because these two guys are conspiracy theory nut jobs that think that he had something to do with the Metro bombing, and they want to, quote, make him pay. It didn't really work out for them all that well. He takes both of their licenses and tells them that to stay put. Two agents will be on their way to interview them, and if they leave, they're going to have the FBI banging down their door. When they get in the car and they start driving to this secure location that Pete's going to take Rose to, the first thing he does is call Diane. He tells Diane that Rose is fine, but he also gives a description of the two guys that just jumped him outside of his apartment. She promises to take care of the two guys and also put some security at his building so stuff like that doesn't happen. Because of what happened, though, he feels a need to explain to Rose exactly why these two guys jumped him, and he fills her in on the fact that people think that his dad was a traitor, but Pete doesn't. Pete thinks that his dad was innocent and he never got a chance to clear his own name. And as for the Metro bombing, he thwarted it, he had nothing to do with it, but that's not going to stop the internet from talking. To say this is a hot-button issue for Peter is an understatement. While driving, though, Pete notices in the rearview mirror that they're being followed by a Mustang. He quickly tries to avoid it, and he confirms, yes, these people are, in fact, following us. He tries losing their tail, and then they start shooting at him. As the guy is shooting them, though, Rose confirms that that person is, in fact, the guy from her aunt's house. Now she's really concerned. How did these people find her is the big question. Doesn't matter. They need to lose these people ASAP. There's one driving, one shooting, and they're hunting them. The good news is the FBI has trained Pete for this situation. He creates a car wreck where he avoids the wreck, and the assassins end up getting in the wreck. This allows them to lose the tail and get to that secure location, which is Pete's buddy's Airbnb. When it dies down a little bit, Pete tells her, "Hey, get some sleep. You need to be well rested for this debriefing." But she wants answers. She wants to know what the hell is going on, why these people are after her, why they were after her aunt and uncle. Pete just doesn't have those answers. The only thing he can tell her is that Night Action is a counterintelligence program. He answers the phone for night agents in distress, and then he just reroutes the call. And people that work in acquisitions don't have that phone number, and they definitely don't have the codes, which means Rose's aunt and uncle were night agents, a.k.a. they were spies. She's got a bunch of other questions, but Pete doesn't have the answers to any of them. Eventually, she gives up questioning him, and she does go to bed. And Pete is left keeping watch, but also keeping tabs on his apartment. Late in the night, he sees somebody on his hidden camera. Someone's broken in. It's two people. They're masked. He has no idea how they got there. He calls Diane. He tells her that there's two guys in my apartment, and she sends in the two people that were paid to keep watch. But once they get in, the intruders are long gone. He can tell that it's the same people that were shooting at him and Rose in the car. And one of the concerning things is, how do they know where to find him? This video, though, ends up helping him out a little bit. He was able to zoom in on one of the intruders' fingers, and he notices a very distinctive ring. He might be able to use that ring to find out who exactly these people are. The next morning, Pete is able to deliver Rose safely to the debriefing. It's in an FBI safe house. Diane is there, as well as Hawkins. Pete's planning on leaving, but Rose actually requests that he stay. And since Diane thinks it'll make her feel more comfortable, she allows it. While Pete is staying, though, he's not going to be in the room for the interrogation. And Rose gets really concerned when she hears that. Even though Pete says to her, "You can trust these two," she doesn't. It's because of what she overheard her aunt say about there being a mole in the White House. She reveals this to Pete because at this point she kind of trusts him, but the issue is she doesn't know who the mole is. Ergo, she doesn't know who she can trust. So she goes into the meeting, and she goes alone, and Pete is standing outside of the door, but she's not planning on giving them any information that they can actually use. As for the two assassins that were after them, well, it's a man and a woman, and they show up at an unassuming house in the DC suburbs. They tell the woman who lives there a story about how the female assassin grew up there and they want to check out the house, but that was just a way to get inside. And once they do, they kill that woman. They then go to retrieve what they came for, which is a duffel bag, and they leave. The male assassin then texts his handler, "Done?" And he texts back, "Good. Now get back to DC and finish what you started." And the assassins are planning on doing that. In episode 2, the questioning of Rose goes on, and they get nowhere. And what it boils down to is she doesn't want to give any information, but the information she does give isn't sufficient enough for Hawkins. He thinks that she knows more, and in reality, she doesn't know all that much. After a bit, Rose gets so frustrated that she gets up and storms out. Both Hawkins and Diane are in agreement that, yeah, she definitely knows something. And Diane asks Peter if he can just try to get something out of her. Kind of buddy up to her, build that trust factor, and extract whatever information that she has so that they can find out who killed her aunt and uncle. In the meantime, they're going to put Rose up in a hotel. A really nice hotel, but one that she can't leave. It should be safe, though. They have Secret Service outside, downstairs, making sure that no one shady gets in or out. But the frustration that she can't leave and her whole life has been turned upside down is really getting to Rose. And all she's caring about at the moment is just staying alive. Peter urges her to go and tell his bosses what she knows, but she's not going to do it because she believes that what her aunt said is true. There is somebody in the White House who's a mole. And if she can positively ID an assassin, then that's not going to be good for her. She's not going to be breathing too much longer. Peter turns around to leave, and Rose asks him, "Where are you going?" Peter explains that he has to go to work, and Rose doesn't want Peter to leave. While she doesn't 100% trust him, she trusts him more than anyone she's met, and now he's bouncing out, and she has no idea whether they're going to see each other again. And Peter admits he doesn't know whether they're going to see each other again, but he's got orders, and she is protected downstairs. He tries to put her mind at ease. It doesn't really work. Peter then leaves the hotel, and he heads back to the White House. He needs to attend a briefing with Hawkins, Diane, and two other higher-ups from the president's office because the president wants to know what's the latest. The latest that Hawkins has is the fact that the Campbells did work for them at one point. The fact that they worked acquisitions wasn't a total lie. They would recruit foreign assets domestically, but they retired a few years ago. And Hawkins says that if their niece was calling night action, then they were doing something off the books. Hawkins gets his back up against the wall when they simply ask him if the Campbells had made any enemies when they were overseas. And he confidently says no. When they follow up and ask how he knows this, he just says, "That's not how it works." At the moment, it's not the best look that all Hawkins has is basically what's in the Campbell's file and a few hunches. He wants to go and take another crack at Rose, but Pete steps in and says, "Don't you think she's been traumatized enough?" And Hawkins yells at him that he's lucky to be in this meeting. Diane is convinced that Hawkins knows something that he's not sharing, but he says, "No, that's it. That's all I know so far." When everybody leaves the room, it's just Diane and Peter, and she tells Peter that she wants him to double-check Hawkins' work. She's going to get Peter the case files of the Campbells, and he's going to look it over while he sits in that windowless room. Before he can dive into the Campbell's file, he gets a little bit of a break. He sent a screenshot of that ring to someone in the FBI, and they've been able to positively ID it. The symbol on the ring looks really close to the family crest from the royal family of Yugoslavia. It's not much, but it's more than Peter had at the moment. He then has to head into that windowless room and start combing over the entire Campbell case file, which is a lot. But the person that was wearing that ring, the assassin, well, he and his girlfriend are heading to D.C. They have to finish that job just like their handler told them. When they get to their own motel, the girlfriend really wants to know what's in that duffel bag. I mean, curiosity is just eating at her. And the male assassin, he just doesn't care. He's found in his profession that it's better to just let sleeping dogs lie. The anticipation never lives up to what is actually in the bag. For his girlfriend, it's the opposite. She can't take it anymore. She opens the duffel bag, and she's surprised to find a nanny cam. Neither of them know what that means. She wants to hack into it, find out what would be on that cam, but her boyfriend puts a stop to that. He then gets a phone call from his handler. There's a man on the phone, and then there's another man in the same room with a suit on, and this one looks like a DC type. They give a call to the assassin because they've gotten word on where Rose is. They're going to send him over the information, and they urge him to finish the job this time. The assassin, though, doesn't recognize the suit's voice, and he asks his handler, "Who's the other guy on the phone?" His handler doesn't give up a name. He just says it's somebody with a vested interest on making sure that you finish what you started. Once they get off the phone, this suit asks the handler how trustworthy these two assassins are. And the handler says, "Well, in 8 years that I've been using them, I've never gotten one complaint." But the fact that Rose is out there seems to be really, really concerning to this DC suit. But the target, Rose, well, she's in that hotel, but she can't sleep. She calls the one person that she feels like at the moment she can trust, and it's Peter. She memorized the night action phone number from seeing it one time, which blows Peter away. He can't believe that she's got a photographic memory like that. But they start talking just kind of about life, about how he got into this situation, being an agent in a windowless room, if it's what he always dreamed of. The quick answer to that is no. He wanted to be the NBA. They get into her career, how she started off in Silicon Valley, how she had this tech startup, and how she trusted the wrong person. Everything was going well for her until somebody named Adam changed the code, which allowed the malware to sneak in and basically ruin her career. She thought her life was over until this whole mess with her aunt and uncle happened. She confides in Peter that she is so lonely all the time, but now that her aunt and uncle are gone, she's even more lonely, and she doesn't know what she's going to do. She asks him if he'd be willing to have breakfast with her, and he says, yeah, of course. Before that breakfast date, he has to meet with Diane. He's been working all night, and after getting off the phone, he did dive into the Campbell's case file, and he did find something pretty interesting. Hawkins was their contact. He was their handler, and he's never mentioned it once. He's never even acted like he knew them. He acted like he knew of them. That's really the only thing he's been able to find, though. He has no idea who killed them. But he has to run because he has to get over to the hotel to meet up with Rose. When he gets there, though, he gets pretty concerned because the Secret Service are gone. And then the lights in the hotel go out. He rushes up the stairwell to Rose's room, and he's relieved because when he gets there, Rose is still there, but the door was open. The lock was busted, which means somebody's coming for him. He doesn't want to sit back and wait to find out who it is. And while trying to sneak Rose out of the building, they get eyes on the assassin. The same one from the Campbell's home, the same one on the road. They start a little bit of a firefight as Peter and Rose try to get out of there. It gets pretty dicey, but Peter and Rose narrowly get away. There is one issue. Rose at the time was wearing a bathrobe, so they need to sneak into a DC boutique and get her some actual clothing. When they get into the changing room and they have a little bit of time to talk about what just transpired, Rose tells Peter that he needs to call the White House to find out who pulled her Secret Service detail. Peter calls Diane, and Diane puts Peter on speakerphone with the two heads of the Secret Service, a guy named Ben and a guy named Nathan. Peter tells the trio what just happened, and everybody in the room is surprised to hear that the Secret Service detail was pulled. They don't know how it happened or who ended up giving that order. But what they do know is the only people that have the power to authorize that are Diane, the president, Ben, Nathan, someone named Director Willett, and then finally, Deputy Director Jamie Hawkins. It's pretty clear to Peter who is the guilty party here. Nathan steps away to call Hawkins' office, but they tell him they have no idea where Hawkins is. That causes a lot of urgency to find out where Hawkins is and for him to explain himself a little bit. Knowing that they're in danger, Diane asks Peter where he is because she wants to send somebody to pick them up. But Peter's not doing that. He tells Diane that he's not going anywhere or telling her anything until they get this crap under control. And even though Diane gives him an order, he ignores it. Because the original order that she gave him was to keep Rose safe at all costs, so he's going to do that. This whole situation has become way more serious than Rose expected. She knows she needs to find out what her aunt and uncle were into. There's really only one way to do that, and that's to go back to her aunt and uncle's house. So that's where Peter and Rose head. It's in her aunt and uncle's house where Rose finally opens up to Peter. She finally trusts him enough. So she tells him everything that she heard that night from her aunt and uncle about Osprey, what was happening in the White House, and then something about files and an engineer. There's also the matter of her aunt saying it was only 7 days before it goes down again. None of that really makes sense to Peter, so he asks Rose, did they say anything else? And she says, yeah, my uncle said something about a drive in the woods. And Rose thinks that what he meant by it was driving into the woods, but Peter realizes no, he meant a computer drive hidden in the woods. And it turns out Rose knows exactly what that means because her uncle had a cabin in the woods. So if there's a computer drive, she knows where it would be. Maybe that has the answers to their issues. They drive out there, they start looking around, and Peter is able to locate the drive. For a computer wizard like Rose, this shouldn't be an issue, but it is, because the drive is heavily encrypted. The only thing she can do is see the files, but she can't see in them. The one file, though, catches Peter's eye. It's file number 2781. And 2781 was the number of the train car that exploded in the metro station, the one that he thwarted. He doesn't think it's a coincidence. And now he's convinced that Rose's aunt and uncle were investigating it. He needs some help, so he calls the Night Action line, and they put him through to Diane Farr. Diane informs him that it was Hawkins who called off her Secret Service detail. There was an order issued from the computer in his office. He wasn't able to confess because Hawkins is dead. He was shot 6 times in the back, just like Rose's aunt and uncle. Diane then asks Peter, why are you calling me? And he says, we found a hard drive, and it's encrypted. And I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the metro bombing. Diane is legitimately worried for the safety of both Rose and Peter. She orders Rose and Peter to come back, and it's something Peter definitely has to think about. But what nobody knows is that before he was killed, Hawkins paid a visit to the assassin's handler. In episode 3, after thinking about it for a short time, Peter tells Diane that they'll be at the White House in an hour, which is something that Rose is against. She doesn't trust Diane. When they get off the phone, Rose rips into Peter for telling Diane that they'll come in, and he reminds her that it was an order. He didn't have a choice. But what he can't wrap his head around is what happened to Hawkins. Not so much that he was killed, but the fact that he turned, because he had a spotless reputation. So what caused him to all of a sudden work for the other side? He also points out that she doesn't have the resources to access the drive. So if they want to find out what's inside, they're going to have to go in, because the White House does have that access. And then finally, he trusts Diane. A year ago, Diane came to him and offered him this position. She didn't judge him on who his dad was. She judged him on who he was. So he's loyal to her. He decides to call Diane up and tell her that Rose is just a little jumpy at the moment. He asks her, why was Hawkins in that field? They don't have any information as of now. Diane reverts the conversation back to Rose, asking Peter, what do you want to do about her? And Peter says, just give us till 10 a.m. After they hang up the phone, Diane has to go and attend the presidential briefing about what went down with Hawkins. One interesting person who's in this briefing is that guy that was on the phone with the assassin's handlers, the guy who had a, quote, vested interest. So not only is he a DC type, he works as a pretty big high up in the White House. When they wrap up the briefing, the president pulls Diane aside because they have a little bit of a history together, a good one, and she asks what's the latest with Rose, and Diane fills her in. Diane, however, is pissed. She tells the president, I'm in the dark here. I have no idea why Hawkins would pull Rose's security detail. And that's because I don't know what Henry and Emma Campbell were investigating through night action to begin with. What were you using them to find? The president decides to fill Diane in. 2 months ago, she had Henry and Emma look into the Metro DC bombing. Intelligence had nothing. She needed to jumpstart this investigation. Now, there was a statement from the People's Independent Front. It's a political group, and they had claimed to take credit for the bombing, but their leaders had said it was forged. It was completely fake. They took no credit for it. It wasn't them. The CIA then spent months listening into their leaders, tapping their phones, and the bombing never came up in conversation, which tipped off the investigators that that statement was actually fake. With that lead dying, the president called on 2 old friends from her Senate intelligence days. What the Campbells ended up finding was the fact that they suspected somebody inside the White House was involved with the Metro bombing. After getting this information, Diane's a little surprised, but she goes home because the next morning she has to be in the office at 10 a.m. for Peter's arrival. Although Peter and Rose don't show up. While Peter trusts Diane, he needed to make sure. He called Diane from his cell phone, something that she would be easily able to track. So if Diane is in fact working for the other side, they'll know if anyone shows up. Early in the morning, Peter and Rose find a hill in the woods to keep an eye on the cabin. And to Peter's surprise, the 2 assassins show up. They're posing as injured hikers, but from afar, Peter recognizes them. Neither Peter or Rose want to stick around, so they end up running over to the car that they stashed and waiting for the group to leave when they figure out that the cabin's empty. They do end up seeing the assassin's car leave. Peter writes down the license plate number. But when the dust settles, he can't believe that Diane had betrayed him. Rose certainly can. She thinks it's pretty obvious. But even after what Peter said about this being the proof that he needed, he still doesn't really believe that it was Diane. There had to be some reason, some other explanation. Either way, Peter knows that he can't take Rose to the White House. He doesn't know he can trust there. So as of now, they're on the run. Peter does have a friend in the police force he can call on to run a license plate for him. At this point, for Peter, the 7 stages of grief are starting to set in. He already went through denial. Now he's at acceptance. But what he can't figure out is how he didn't see it. And what really bothers him is, if he didn't see it, what does it say about him? But Rose now is also willing to look at the other side. She says, devil's advocate, Diane was innocent. That means somebody was able to look at her call log and they tracked us from your phone. So we still can't trust her to keep the hard drive safe, not until we crack it. We also have to figure out who Osprey is and what's happening in 5 days. But all isn't lost, though. Rose does have an idea. She needs to get access to that drive, but her computer doesn't have the capability. So she poses a bold move. She is going to go on the run. Peter is going to show up at the White House so he doesn't raise red flags, and he's going to tell them that she ditched him. Peter is then going to give Diane the drive, and at some point, Peter is going to sneak into Diane's computer and put some software on it that allows Rose to remotely access whatever is on it. That way, when the drive is opened up and the encryption is taken off, Rose will be able to access all of the files and wipe it clean. Peter's really hesitant to do this because if he gets caught with his past regarding his dad, it's not going to be a good look. But Rose convinces him that it is the best move. Right before they go their separate ways, they agree on a meetup spot, and then Peter moseys on into the White House and starts phase 1 of this plan. After debriefing Diane and handing over the drive, he texts Rose that the police are after her. They have a description of what she looks like, so lay low. She decides to do that in a diner. Probably not the best place considering cops eat there, but it is a place with Wi-Fi that she can use so that when Peter does put that spyware into Diane's computer, Rose will be easily able to access it. In order to do that, though, they're going to have to distract Diane, which means Rose is going to have to call the night agent phone line and get Diane on that phone, which will allow Peter to swipe Diane's badge to get into her office. While Diane sits in that windowless room, unaware of the fact that she's getting played, Peter jumps into action. He tells Diane that he's going off to track Rose's phone when in reality he's sneaking off to go to Diane's office. Following the instruction that Rose gives him, he puts in that spyware and it allows Rose to grab all of the files before she's caught. When it's all done, Rose just hangs up on Diane, telling her that she's not coming in. As soon as Rose got the files, she left that diner. She wasn't going to stick around. She had to get to a safe space to find out what was on those files. There is a problem, though. Peter really messed up. He left the flash drive in Diane's computer, and Diane quickly realizes what happened. She goes and confronts Peter about it because she feels completely betrayed. She can't believe she trusted him, and now it turns out he's working for somebody else. But the whole thing was just a giant miscommunication because Peter obviously thought that he couldn't trust Diane. He explains himself to Diane, tells her why they thought that she was after him, and he's got a pretty good reason. She was the only one who knew where they were. But it turns out Diane didn't send those people. What she fears is that her phone has spyware on it, and that somebody was tracking her, listening to her calls, and was able to figure out where Peter and Rose were. They decide to put all their cards on the table. Diane fills Peter in on exactly what she heard from the president regarding what was going on with Rose's aunt and uncle. She doesn't know who this mole is in the White House, but clearly they're senior enough to get spyware on her phone. Peter then tells Diane the plan with Rose grabbing the files, and since they seem to be on the same side, Peter and Diane go to link up with Rose at the motel that Rose went to comb over what she could find. She was able to find an address for a place. She writes that down. But she's surprised when there's a knock at her door and it's Peter, but also Diane, because at this point, she doesn't know that she can trust Diane. Peter urges Rose, though, to just hear Diane out, and Diane says, if you want answers, I've got some. Now, while Diane is filling Rose in on what her aunt and uncle were up to, Ben Almora, the head of the Secret Service, was on another mission. He called up one of his agents named Chelsea Arrington. She's in charge of the detail regarding the vice president's daughter. He tells Chelsea that he's sending over an agent named Eric Monks to be on that detail. Eric Monks is a Secret Service legend. He took a bullet for the president. He's been on rehab. And Almora tells Chelsea that he just wants to kind of integrate Monks slowly back into the role. So he's going to put him on what usually would be looked at as a thankless, low-level detail. Chelsea's pretty young, but she takes her job very, very seriously. She's also built a really good rapport with Maddie Redfield, the vice president's daughter, who's at Georgetown. Double major, studying poli-sci and art. She's trying to be as normal of a student as possible, but it is tough with a security detail. It's something that she really appreciates about Chelsea, the fact that Chelsea at least tries to blend in with other students and look somewhat inconspicuous. Chelsea fills Eric Monks in on all the details regarding Maddie, her schedule and whatnot. But the first night on the job, Eric really screws up. There's a guy that recognizes Maddie at a club, and he accosts her. Eric acted too slowly, and this perpetrator ended up getting hands on Maddie, which is a big, big no-no. While she doesn't want to do it, Chelsea has to rat out Monks to Almora. Chelsea doesn't think Monks is ready, but Ben Almora does. But they have a past. Ben Almora and Monks used to be partners. So whether Chelsea likes it or not, Monks is going to stay on the detail. This whole situation, though, reeks. Chelsea meets with one of her friends at the CIA, and she asks him for a favor. She wants to know why exactly Eric Monks has been assigned to this detail. She doesn't believe what Almora is telling her. But it might have to do with what's going down in 5 days. Maddie, being an art major, had to take some art classes. And one particular class, the teacher's a little too friendly. It's nothing major, but, hand on the small of the back. Maddie really likes it, but it's all part of a plan. Because this teacher is a plant. He was sent there to gain Maddie's trust, and then God knows what. But he's getting pressured to speed it up. And all that pressure is coming from the guy with the snake tattoo. The same guy that planted the bomb on the DC Metro. In episode 4, Chelsea gets her answer as to what the hell Monks is doing on this detail. He's an addict. After getting shot and taking a bullet for the president, he developed an addiction to painkillers, had to go to rehab, and because he has friends in high places, they told him that if he stayed clean for a year and did this detail, he might be able to wiggle his way back to the president. When Chelsea finds out about this, she's pissed. She already wasn't a big fan of Monks to begin with, but now with this boys club BS, she's even more pissed off. Because she takes this job really seriously. She wants to work her way up. But now she has this guy being given a second chance that she, quite frankly, doesn't think he deserves. She brings it up with him, he admits everything, but then they have to put their issues aside because they have to deal with Maddie's day. And things are certainly developing pretty quickly between Maddie and her teacher. The very next class, they end up hooking up. He does the whole, "Oh, I'm so sorry. This is, no, we can't do this," knowing full well that they're going to do it. And she, being a sheltered, horned-up 21-year-old, is like, "No, bud, you're going to kiss me." And it gets hot, and it gets steamy, and it gets passionate, but Maddie has no idea that all of it's fake. The two continue to hook up the next day, although they have to be covert about it. It does seem like Monk notices something between the two as he's just doing his precautionary checks, but Maddie's pretty certain that nobody knows other than her and her teacher. Now, not too far away, in a dingy, rundown motel, Diane fills Rose in on everything she knows about what her aunt and uncle were into. In return for this information, Diane wants the hard drive. She wants to know what's on it. But Rose is reluctant to give it up because Diane doesn't know who she can trust in the White House. And Diane says, "I can trust the president. I've known her since she ran for state rep. That was over 20 years ago." Even after making her case as to why Rose should hand over the hard drive, Rose still doesn't want to. She'd rather attempt to finish the job with Peter than hand it over and risk it getting into the wrong hands. Knowing that she's fighting a losing battle, Diane says, "Okay, when we walked in, you said you found something. Follow that lead, find out whatever you can, and just touch base with me. I'll deal with presenting it to the president." Diane turns to leave, and Rose says, "Wait, do you know the term osprey?" And the only thing Diane knows about is the bird. Rose mentions how her uncle said it, and Diane promises to look into it. A short time after Diane leaves, Peter and Rose head out to that address that Rose found in the hard drive. They don't exactly know what to expect. On the way over there, they discuss what else Rose found on the drive. There were thousands of files, but there was one in particular that caught her interest. It was a file on Omar Zadal. Omar Zadal is the leader of the People's Independence Front, the people that, quote, took credit for the bombing, but then immediately denied that it was them. No one really believes that Omar Zadal or the People's Independent Front had anything to do with the bombing at this point. And plus, Omar Zadal is running for office. He's gone legit. Still, the fact that there is a folder in the hard drive with his name on it is fishy to Rose. She did do a deep dive into Farr and Hawkins, but didn't find anything on the drive with their names. They then get to the location of the address, and it's just a farmhouse. On the drive, it was made out to be an engineering company, but when they knock on the door, it's just some woman who's pretty gruff with them and claims she doesn't know anything. And when Rose and Peter kind of push the issue, the woman presents them with a shotgun. Neither Peter or Rose really feel like getting shot at again, so they turn to go away, but then Rose recognizes the landscape. She recognizes it from when she was a kid. She turns around to this woman, and she tells her how she came here when she was a little girl with her Aunt Claire. She would play over there, and then she came in the house. They made cookies with another woman. And Rose is thinking that other woman is standing in front of her. The woman, whose name is Lorna, remembers the story and then realizes who Rose is and invites both Rose and Peter inside. Rose and Peter break the news to Lorna that the Campbells are dead. You can tell by her reaction that Lorna legitimately had no idea about this. She doesn't watch the news. Rose then cuts to the chase and says, "We know they were spies, we have their hard drive, and that's how we got your address." They start prodding for any information that Lorna might have, but Lorna is reluctant to give it because she feels like the more information that these two have, the more dangerous it'll be for them. Rose, however, says, "No, we're way past that. We know somebody in the White House has turned traitor, and whoever that is, we know they're part of the Metro bombing. We're also pretty sure another attack is about to happen. So please, what do you know?" And Lorna tells both of them that she doesn't know much. Her job was to collect the intel and give it over to the Campbells. And what the Campbells wanted was blueprints for infrastructure, public buildings. With Lorna's background as a civil engineer, she had the contacts to get those sort of things. She doesn't know why they needed it. She never asked. But the files that Lorna gave the Campbells, folks like Rose and Peter, they're not going to understand them without Lorna. They need a civil engineer to explain the details of them. The good news is Lorna is willing to take a road trip and take a look at them. On the way over to look at the drive, Lorna gives a brief background as to how she met the Campbells. It's a nice little insight for Rose, who's finding out more and more about her aunt and uncle, who she thought were just normal people. Lorna also mentions how she knows who Peter's dad is. And Peter gets excited because he thinks that Lorna knew him, but she says, no, I just recognize the name. Now, Lorna is leading them to the building of the blueprints the Campbells wanted. It's in downtown D.C. It's a really popular area. They head to a coffee shop and they start showing Lorna what is in the files. And a lot of it is just about power grids, gas lines, building structures. And to Lorna's best guess, it was probably the Campbells looking for vulnerabilities for another attack. The thing is, they don't know what exactly the attack would be on. They also notice in the drive that there's security footage for every single camera on the block, and it all dates back to the day of the original Metro bombing. It's not a coincidence. Peter, who was in the bathroom, comes back to the table and tells them that the Metro runs directly under the cafe. He then realizes that the attack was actually supposed to take place at this block. The only reason it didn't was because Peter had pulled the emergency brake and the bomb detonated 2 blocks away. And after looking at the schematics, they realized that Peter's right. Because if a bomb were to detonate where they're sitting, it would take out 2 city blocks with gas lines and whatnot. Lorna still doesn't know exactly what they were attacking or why they were doing this, but she does tell both of them, if you want to find out who the traitor is, you got to find out what you prevented that day, what they were trying to attack. They then have to say goodbye to Lorna. She desperately wants to get back to her home, where she feels safe. But right before she leaves, Peter says, wait, you knew my father, didn't you? And Lorna says, no, I didn't, but I did know 2 agents who worked his case. Sorry to say, they certainly seem to think he was guilty. And Peter gets upset and yells, well, then why haven't I seen anything about this case? Because up until this point, it's all been under lock and key. But Lorna asks him, what would that change? And to Peter, it would mean everything. But Lorna kind of laughs at that and says, stop worrying about your dad and start worrying about Rose. Shortly after Lorna leaves, Peter gets a phone call from that state trooper friend who he gave the license plate info to. They've located the car. It's in a D.C. suburb. That's because the assassin couple had been playing house there. The female assassin really wants to settle down. She wants a normal life that isn't on the run and killing people, and she thought they could kind of play house for a little bit with a house that is for sale. The fact that the house is for sale and no one's supposed to be living in it and lights on piqued the interest of neighbors. They called the police located the car. So the state troopers are headed over there, as well as Peter and Rose. But when they get there, the couple's nowhere to be found, because the couple got word from their handler to go and kill Lorna, which they do. So it's another dead end for Peter and Rose. Before the assassins did kill Lorna, she seemed to give up a little bit of information. We don't know what that information is, but what we do know is it's not enough for the assassins or the handler that they can use to get Rose. After striking out, though, at the assassins' attempt at playing house, Peter and Rose end up getting a motel room. Because the motel's booked, they share a room, and it allows Rose to continue to go over some of the drive. She continues to look into Zadar, but there's nothing, one way or the other. She thinks that maybe someone in the White House had offered him something to do it in order to keep their hands clean, but she has no proof of that. It's just a hunch. Peter, though, has brought food, so they decide to have dinner together, and it's really the first time that both of them can enjoy life and not think about their current situation. They do this crazy thing. It's called laugh. The next morning, Rose picks up her investigation, looking at a bunch of surveillance video from the drive. She's looking for shady characters, but so far, she hasn't seen any. She asks Peter if there was any suspects for the bombing, and he gives her the description of the guy with the snake tattoo, but it's really not a lot to go on. He was wearing a jacket and a hoodie. Peter then gets a phone call from Diane, and he fills Diane on the fact that they think there's going to be another attack. Diane tells Peter they need to share this news with the FBI. Peter agrees, but when he hangs up the phone, he sees something that really piques his interest. It's one of the surveillance videos. It's from the cafe they were in, and it's a woman looking out a window and talking to herself. But Peter knows that woman isn't talking to herself. She's a Secret Service agent. Because that agent is Chelsea. And now Peter knows that the attack was probably going to be on somebody that she was protecting. But in a really messed up twist, Chelsea's dad, the vice president, is the guy with the vested interest. The guy who was sending assassins to do his bidding via an intermediary. Yeah, that's her dad. In episode 6, the conversation between the vice president and Maddie is pretty contentious. Maddie really wants to go off and study abroad in Italy, while her dad puts down the hammer and says, no, you're coming with me and traveling around to political rallies. We have to show a unified front for the re-election campaign. Even though these two clearly do not have a good relationship, when the cameras are put in front of them, they put on a good face. Maddie, however, is miserable. And it's something that Chelsea definitely knows. When her dad finally leaves and Maddie is able to get back to her dorm room with just her and Chelsea says maybe there's something we can do to come up with an excuse so you don't have to go. But Maddie says, no, I'll go, like always. It's something that Chelsea just doesn't understand. She doesn't know how she does it. Faking it like that, it's tough, and she knows that it's tough. In the middle of trying to console Maddie, Chelsea gets word on the radio that there's an FBI agent there to talk to her, and it's Peter. She kind of recognizes Peter, and he introduces himself, and he asks about her whereabouts the day of the metro bombing. What he really wants to know is, who was she protecting? And Rose just blurts out, was it Maddie Redfield? Because that's who they assume Chelsea's supposed to protect. But Chelsea isn't willing to give up that information, not without a formal request. She's very by the book. Peter even reveals that they have reason to believe Maddie is in danger, but they don't have specifics of that. They just think that it was Maddie who was the target that day of the metro bombing. Still, Chelsea isn't willing to reveal any information, especially with a civilian standing right there, the civilian being Rose. Peter tries everything. He even tries dropping Diane Farr's name, but it doesn't work. Chelsea says that she has to run this conversation up the flagpole, and if she does get clearance, she will tell Peter what he wants to know. She takes his number, but until she gets that, she's not revealing any information. The three then go their separate ways, with Peter and Rose heading off to the Georgetown Library, and Chelsea going off to call Ben Almora, the head of the Secret Service, and tell him about Peter's little visit. When Ben hears that this was all Diane Farr's idea, he gets livid. He goes and confronts her. He doesn't like the fact that Diane has her agents confronting his agents about whereabouts, what they were doing, who they're protecting, all of this without the chain of command's approval. He demands to know exactly what Peter is getting himself into. But she's not about to do that, especially after what Ben's people, the Secret Service, did to Rose in the hotel by abandoning her. She basically tells him, mind your own business, but he's not going to mind his own business. He's alerted the vice president and the president about this. A little while later, the president, the vice president, the FBI director, and Almora all meet with Diane. Almora fills the group in on what exactly Peter's up to. The fact that he arrived on Georgetown's campus, along with Rose Larkin, claiming that he's under assignment from Diane Farr, and it has to do with an attack on Maddie. The group all looks to Diane for an explanation, and the only explanation she gives is that after what happened with Rose, she put Rose under the protection of the only person she can trust, and that's Peter. The vice president, though, is especially annoyed. He demands to know what exactly Peter is doing around his daughter, but Diane doesn't know. She hasn't heard from him. Ben and the vice president both want to bring Peter in to question him on exactly what he's got going on. Diane, meanwhile, tells the president Peter's loyal. He'll report in. I'll have an answer to all of this by the end of the day. Before making her decision, the president wants to speak to Diane and Diane alone. With no one in the room, Diane tells the president Peter's clearly onto something. They picked up whatever the Campbells were doing, and they're carrying the case. I don't know how that led him to Maddie Redfield, but it did. The president isn't really happy with this answer, and she demands that Diane get them back in the White House before it's too late. The thing is, Diane and Peter have been limiting communication, so she's just going to have to wait until Peter touches base with her. Now, the good thing about this whole mess is that it wasn't a total loss for Peter. Chelsea does get clearance to call Peter and tell him she wasn't with Maddie Redfield that day. As for who she was protecting, she can't reveal that information. Before she hangs up, she does tell Peter, if you have any information on an attack against Maddie, I need to know. And Peter tells her, if it wasn't her you were with at the coffee shop, then you're right. You don't need to know. Because she has nothing to do with it. Chelsea's a little confused and asks Peter, what do you mean coffee shop? And Peter says, you tell me. Chelsea says, I'm hanging up now. But right before she does, Peter asks, does the name Osprey mean anything to you? And Chelsea pauses. It's as if she does recognize the name. But she just hangs up anyway. With no real leads, Peter and Rose have to pick up in the library and try to figure out their only clue at this moment, the ring. The coat of arms from the Kingdom of Yugoslavia is close to the ring, but it's not an exact match. Peter then brings up to Rose another thing that's really been bothering him. When everyone thought the bomber was PIF, it became a military operation. The FBI stopped looking into suspects, case was closed, it was over. The person that made that call was Hawkins. So Rose asks, is there any way to look at his files? And Peter's pretty sure he's not going to be able to access his files. But he does get an idea. Go and talk to Hawkins' widow. Peter wants Rose to come with, but Rose thinks that's going to be a waste of time. She wants to stay in the library and figure out if she can find out anything on this ring. They go back and forth with this, but eventually Rose convinces Peter it would be best if he just go and she stay there. After all, nobody kills anybody in a library, except John Wick. After combing over hours of books, of family crests, coat of arms, she thinks she finds it. It's for the Pavlovich family. A quick Google search reveals that the Pavloviches were a monarchy from Yugoslavia. A guy named Andrei Pavlovich, who was a rising political star and a distant cousin of the Crown Prince of Yugoslavia, criticized the Crown Prince's recent statement calling for a reestablishment over the defunct Yugoslavian monarchy in Serbia. A little while later, Pavlovich disappeared. Police had posted a sketch of the suspect that they think killed or took him, and it looks a lot like the guy that killed Rose's aunt and uncle. With this news, Rose just has to wait until Peter returns. And Peter headed off to go talk to Hawkins' widow. Peter asks his widow, who's a little gruff, if he can ask her a few questions on something that he, along with her husband, were looking into before he died. She reluctantly lets him in, and Peter starts to explain that he, along with Hawkins, were part of a group that was investigating the Metro bombing. Hawkins' widow just cuts Peter off and says, I told the other people. I don't know anything. Jamie wasn't allowed to talk about his work with me. Well, one of the reasons why Peter thought that maybe Hawkins would share it with his wife is because his wife used to work in the FBI. She's not really just some civilian. She knows her way around this kind of thing. Peter asks if he can see Hawkins' files, but she brings him to his office and says they already went through all his files. While Peter's kind of surveying the room, Cynthia Hawkins mentions how her husband served for 30 years and now he's being treated like a criminal. And Peter says, I know how you feel. And she shoots back, you have no idea how I feel. But Peter actually does, and he goes into his story about his dad and about being wrongly persecuted. But now he's questioning that. He goes into this whole thing about how, yeah, he thought he knew his dad, but then you start questioning, why does everybody think he was guilty when you actually knew him? So then you start wondering, maybe you didn't know him at all. Maybe they all are right. This does work. Cynthia asks Peter, what does this have to do with you? And Peter says, the person that I'm protecting is in danger, and whatever your husband was looking into, it has something to do with it. That's when Cynthia reveals that she lied earlier when she said that her husband never shared any information. He always picked her brain regarding stuff. She tells Peter that her husband was working on the Metro bombing case for a while, but there was some inconsistency that he picked up on. He thought somebody interfered with the FBI's investigation. All the pieces that they were left with, it just didn't add up. Now, as for all of the Omar Zadal stuff, that was just crap. When the confession came in, the Bureau had a list of suspects, and none of them were connected to Zadar. Hawkins then went back through some case files, and she's pretty sure he found something that pointed straight to a government contractor. The contractor is called Turn Lake Industries. It's a company that Peter's never heard of. But Cynthia goes on to explain that the day her husband went missing, he had a secret meeting with them. She has no idea exactly who was in this meeting, but she's pretty sure it was the CEO. Cynthia's pretty certain that Jamie was killed that day because he was close to getting to the bottom of the Metro bombing case. With this new information, Peter heads back to the library where Rose tells him all about the Pavlovich family and then shows him the picture of Pavlovich's suspected kidnapper. Rose looked into Pavlovich a little bit more, and before he went missing, he was going to the press and railing against an American defense contractor. Pavlovich claimed that this contractor was conducting shadow ops throughout the Balkans. That contractor was Turn Lake Industries. Peter instructs Rose to keep looking into Turn Lake, find out anything she can regarding who they donate to, political allies, things like that. He steps away to go contact Diane Farr and check in. She's on edge, and she tells Peter why, and he explains his side of things. They thought that somebody was out to hurt Maddie Redfield. Ultimately, it seems like that proved to be a dead end. He does think Secret Service ultimately has the missing piece to all of it. But he brings up to Diane Turn Lake Industries. She knows exactly who they are because they have contracts with the Pentagon and all over the world. Peter then tells Diane that he's pretty sure the assassins are working for Turn Lake. Diane tells them to gather everything they have. They need to brief the president. And then she instructs he and Rose to get their ass back to the White House immediately. When Peter walks back over to Rose and her computer, she's dug in and found some stuff. Turn Lake Industries donations to politicians. The person that they donated most to is the vice president. They gather all their stuff together. They head out to their car, but there's an issue. They're being tracked by the two assassins. When word got out that Peter was in Georgetown, he wasn't all that hard to find. So while they're heading back to the White House, they're doing so with company. Now, as for the other party in Georgetown, Maddie and Chelsea, Maddie's planning on meeting her teacher that night, although she's playing it off like she's going to an art show. While Chelsea is accompanying Maddie all over campus to her classes, Eric Monks had to head back to the White House and do his drug test, but he also meets with Ben. The two are friends, but Ben has to show Eric the report that Chelsea put together about what went down in the bar, and it doesn't paint Eric in the best light. Ben isn't really worried about Eric's job. He's just worried that he's in the right headspace to do it. He then, however, asks Eric what his feelings are regarding Chelsea, and he says she's sharp, she's good at her job, she just has a different way of doing things. It's like her and Maddie are friends. And he's not far off from what he says. Chelsea and Maddie are kind of friends. But to Chelsea, that's why she thinks the relationship has worked so well. Good example of that is she lets Maddie borrow one of her necklaces to go out to this art show. When it comes time to actually leave for that art show, though, Eric was supposed to accompany Maddie, but Chelsea says, I'm going to stay on duty for this one. Eric knows that this has to do with what happened the other night. So he asks Chelsea, I'm just wondering how long you're going to hold this grudge for. She's kind of taken aback by this and says, a grudge? No, this is about Maddie. I want to be there for her tonight, and I have to bump someone, and you're the new guy. But now that you brought it up, you're the only member of my detail who's ever shit the bed in a high-stakes situation. It then sparks a little bit of debate between the two. Monk's thinking that she doesn't know what a high-stakes situation is, and Chelsea trying to explain to Monks that she wants to get ahead. Everybody thinks this detail's a joke, but she takes it seriously because she wants to one day be protecting the president. Cooler heads eventually do prevail, but Eric's left home, and Chelsea escorts Maddie to the art show, where Maddie ultimately is able to escape. She does leave a note on the mirror that apologizes to Chelsea for doing what she's doing, but Maddie doesn't realize that it's dangerous to do what she's doing. She thinks her teacher's safe. She finds out pretty quickly after getting to her teacher's house, though, that it's not the case. She starts making out with him. Things get hot. Things get heavy. I'm talking it's rainforest sweaty in that room. And then the teacher's roommate shows up, which terrifies Maddie. She's very confused because she's just got this stranger staring at her. She's not wearing a shirt. But then on top of it, she hears her teacher yelling at the guy that he told him he would call him when they were done. He then tells the guy that he doesn't have to force Maddie. She'll say what they need her to say. Maddie has no idea what's going on. And then she hears this roommate hold up a gun and say, I need something else. And he shoots her teacher. Maddie is super terrified. She tries to get to her panic button, but it's too late. The guy grabs her and drags her out of the room. Chelsea does show up at the teacher's apartment, but it's too late. When Maddie went missing, it was a perfect opportunity for Eric Monks to kind of rub it in her face, but he didn't. He actually tipped Chelsea off as to where Maddie might be. because Monks noticed that her and her teacher just had something about them that was weird. Going off this tip, Chelsea got the address, headed to the teacher's apartment, and she found a bloodbath. But she didn't find Maddie. In episode 6, the FBI comes into the apartment, and along with Chelsea, they start looking into the disappearance of Maddie. Now, while Monks could really be a detriment in this situation and rub it in Chelsea's face, he doesn't. He tries to be the ultimate partner, helping her figure out exactly what happened to the vice president's daughter. With Monk's experience, it's a good thing that he's willing to be Chelsea's second in command because he knows that they don't have a lot of time. They start looking around the apartment for some clues, and what they find are drawings of Maddie. And that's when Chelsea gets really down on herself because she realizes that this teacher had been grooming Maddie for quite some time and Chelsea never picked up on it. She starts beating herself up over this, and Monks tries to make her feel better, but Chelsea isn't in the mood for a pep talk. She kind of snaps at Monks a little bit. Monks says to her, hey, take some advice. Don't bottle this stuff up. It's best to actually open up to your partner. Trust me, I know from experience. Chelsea, however, isn't willing to open up to Monks quite yet. They keep looking for clues, and they do find some. It's drawings of another person, and there's a lot of them. One drawing in particular has this guy without a shirt on and a very recognizable snake tattoo. But the tattoo isn't what gets Chelsea's eye. It's the symbol behind him. She recognizes it. Something in Maddie's room. She's not quite sure what, but she does want to go investigate it. They go to leave this apartment to head back to Maddie's dorm to try to find some hint of what that symbol does mean, but Ben Almora shows up and tries to put the kibosh on it. He wants to let Chelsea go from the investigation. Ben heaps all the blame on Chelsea because, after all, she was the one in charge of the Secret Service detail, the detail that let Maddie Redfield escape, but that ultimately led to her kidnapping. So it's understandable of why he puts the blame on her. But when he tries to put Monks in charge, Monks fights him on it. And he says, no, Ben, you're not going to do that. If we want to find Maddie, which is the ultimate goal, we need Chelsea. Chelsea knows Maddie better than anybody. So if you want any hope of finding the vice president's daughter, you'll keep her on this detail. Almora reluctantly agrees to Monks, but does tell him, she can stay, but you're in charge. And you would think that Monks coming to Chelsea's defense would actually be a good thing, but no, she doesn't take it like that at all. She gets pissed off. And when she gets to Maddie's dorm room, she can't keep it in anymore. She feels like, from the conversation that she just heard between Ben, herself, and Monks, that it's pretty clear Ben and Monks have been talking about Chelsea and been talking about what kind of job she's done. And she feels like she hasn't been portrayed correctly, that she's not good at her job because she's close to Maddie. Because of this, she gives Monks a lot of attitude, but Monks realizes in this situation that Chelsea isn't actually mad at him. She's mad at the situation. She's stressed out and she puts a lot of blame on herself. So while she might be giving him a lot of attitude, he doesn't really fight her on it. He tries once again to give her a pep talk, telling her that you can't protect a protectee from themselves. This time, his little pep talk does work. She ultimately apologizes reluctantly and admits that she's not mad at him, she's just mad at the situation, and then they're able to get back on track with looking for this symbol. Through talking it out, she remembers that Maddie keeps a secret box hidden in the ceiling, and it's stuff that she doesn't want anyone to find out about. So if Maddie didn't want Chelsea, someone she's close with, to find out something, she would likely keep it in that box. Chelsea goes, she locates the box, and sure enough, she finds a pamphlet for an environmentalist group called New Leaf. Maddie did talk to Chelsea briefly about New Leaf, about how some boy invited her to one of their meetings, but she wasn't planning on going. Guess it was important enough, though, to keep the pamphlet. When they turn to the back of the pamphlet, there's a note written that says, I really hope to see you there, -PB. And that's from the professor. Monks does a quick Instagram search and finds out that the professor was the head of the DC chapter of New Leaf. And New Leaf does have some credibility. They recently staged a sit-in at a refinery for months and it worked. So this group has been gaining traction all over the country. But on that same Instagram page, it's another picture that catches Chelsea's eye. All the way in the background, you see a guy without a shirt who's sporting a very noticeable snake tattoo on his ribcage. They feel like if they find this guy with the snake tattoo, they might be able to locate Maddie. And at the same moment that they're looking for clues, the vice president is being informed about Maddie's abduction. At first, he thinks it's nothing more than her running off, but then he legitimately gets concerned when he finds out that she was abducted and her teacher was killed. You can tell by his reaction that it is genuine. He had no idea this was going to happen. Now, while people in the White House are frantically looking for Maddie Redfield, somewhere in D.C., Peter and Rose are headed back to the White House, but they're actually not going there. Peter tells Rose that the vice president didn't have authorization to pull her Secret Service detail that day in the hotel, which means that somebody must be working with him. And until they find out who that person is, it doesn't make much sense to walk into the White House together. They have no line of exit. So what Peter's going to do is he's going to drive Rose to his friend's place where he knows that she'll be safe. He'll then go to the White House, debrief Diane on everything they found, and get a safe transfer for Rose over to the White House. The place where Peter decides to take Rose is his buddy Francisco's apartment. Francisco is the state trooper who helped out Peter earlier. They go way back from Quantico. Peter is one of Francisco's best friends. He knows that Francisco will protect Rose at all costs, and she'll be safe there. Before Peter heads off, he does remind Rose about their meetup spot, the fishing pier. This is just in case anything were to go awry. But unbeknownst to Peter, they were being followed. The two assassins were putting that tracker to use. And Peter did have an inkling that somebody was behind them, but when he went through a red light and no one sped up, he just assumed that he was being paranoid. When in reality, they didn't speed up because they knew exactly where Peter was going. Now, when Peter headed to the White House, he didn't take that vehicle. So those two assassins are simply parked outside of Francisco's apartment waiting for someone to come out. And they don't see Peter. So Peter unassumingly heads off to go meet with Diane, and as soon as he gets to the White House, he knows that something's going on because everyone's kind of running around and they seem hyper-focused on one thing. When he eventually meets with Diane, he asks her, "What's going on around here?" And she tells him that he doesn't have to worry about it, but just crap seems to be hitting the fan at the moment. What she's really focused on is the fact that Peter didn't bring Rose. He's once again not following orders, and she gets pretty pissed off. And Peter says, "Once I tell you what we found, you'll understand why I did what I did. Rose is just with a buddy at the moment. But don't worry, her and the drive are safe." Peter then gets into what they found. The fact that the bombing was actually disguised as an assassination attempt, and whoever that attempt was against was the person who Chelsea was to protect that day. Which is incredible timing and leads Diane to inform Peter about the fact that Chelsea Redfield was abducted. The big thing, though, in the dossier is the connection between Gordon Wick, the CEO of Turn Lake, and the vice president, and how they clearly know each other, are friendly, and might be in bed with each other. Diane looks at Peter and says, "You know what you're saying, right?" And he says, "I do. But I'm not even worried about what they've done. I'm worried about what they will do. Because everything on the drive indicates there will be another attack." This is just a ton for Diane to take in. But she collects herself and says, "Okay, we need to prep the president on this. We need to talk to her, and you need to be there for it." Peter then says to Diane that he'll have his buddy bring in Rose. It needs to be discreet. And Diane nods and says, "Yeah, we'll bring her in through the FDR tunnel. Have your state trooper friend drop her off at the docks." And that is where Diane screws up. She doesn't even know she did it. Because Peter never told Diane that it was Francisco who was watching Rose. He just said that a friend was watching Rose. And when Diane says that and messes up, Peter now knows that Diane has been playing him this entire time, and she's in on it. So once Diane leaves the room, Peter angrily calls Rose and says, "Yeah, Diane's been playing us. She's in on it. She knows you're with Francisco. You guys got to get the hell out of there. Leave now. Meet me at the pier." And as he's calling Rose, Diane is calling Gordon Wick, telling him, "Peter's on to you." He's been able to connect the dots. He knows about everything, including the vice president. Now, while Diane is freaking out a little bit, Gordon Wick stays calm and says, "What do you want to do?" And Diane thinks for a bit and tells him, "I'll have Peter arrested. We'll isolate him until we can figure out the best way to silo him off. As for Rose, have your assassins kill her." Once she hangs up the phone, she grabs a couple of Secret Service agents and goes back to her office, but Peter's gone. So they put the APB out to be on the lookout for Peter, but they don't catch him. Peter, using some quick thinking and some creative hiding skills, is able to sneak out of the White House undetected where he heads to the pier. As for Rose and Francisco, they head to the pier, but Francisco realizes very quickly that they're being followed by a quite aggressive driver. Because of this, he knows that they must have put a tracker on the car. So they stop off very quickly and he lets Rose out so she can run off to the pier. And hopefully, he'll lead these people away from her. It doesn't work, however. The assassins see that they stopped off, and the male assassin heads off to go find Rose. The female assassin, using the tracker, is able to T-bone Francisco's car, where she walks up and shoots him at point-blank range. Not too long after that, the male assassin catches up to Rose near the water, and he starts attacking her. But Peter shows up in the nick of time where both of them are able to neutralize this guy and ultimately kill him. Even though that's not what Peter wanted to do, the guy kind of forced his hand. Peter and Rose get out of there. A short time later, the female assassin sees a dead body floating in the water, and she's beside herself because it's her boyfriend. The guy that she was planning on having a future with is dead, and she's not happy about it. But before he died, that guy did take a chunk of Peter with him. Using a knife, he was able to cut Peter up pretty good, so Rose and Peter need a place to lay low, and they head to a houseboat that is owned by one of Peter's dad's friends. As Rose is patching up Pete, Diane Farr was busy ripping into the vice president. She hands him the dossier and tells him that Peter and Rose are onto him and Wick. The bigger issue is they don't have the drive and Peter escaped, but they're going to be able to use Maddie's disappearance to their advantage to cover everything up. They're going to go and have a press conference where they tell the world that it was Peter Sutherland who was the one that kidnapped Maddie Redfield. Peter, who's already in a pretty bad mood because news of Francisco's death has gotten out, gets in an even worse mood when they hear the vice president address the nation saying that Peter was the one who kidnapped his daughter, because it's the farthest thing from the truth. And now he has a giant target on his back. In episode 7, Peter's more upset about Francisco's death than he actually being portrayed as the kidnapper. He's really, really broken up about it. Rose does her best to remind her that none of this is Peter's fault, but it doesn't really work. But they both are going through grief, because he losing his friend, she losing her aunt and uncle. What does grief cause? Horned up emotions. They finally hook up. Afterwards, Peter hops on the internet, where that conspiracy theory whack job has gone on a tangent about Peter, about finding him, and about sending his minions on the lookout to bring this guy to justice. Rose interrupts this and reminds him that doom scrolling is not going to help the situation, and they start formulating a plan. They know that in order to free Peter's name, they need a smoking gun. Now, Peter's portal access has been denied, but on his way out of the White House, he did steal the badge of somebody that worked there, whose portal access hasn't been denied yet. And considering Rose knows how to hack a computer, she starts going to work on trying to find out exactly what the FBI was investigating regarding the Metro bombing and the details that Peter gave them. While Rose starts hacking, the FBI and the Secret Service start looking for Pete. But two people that just don't buy it are Chelsea and Monks, because Peter just doesn't fit the description of a guy that would kidnap the vice president's daughter. But either way, they're instructed to look through Peter's things, and they don't find anything linking him to the president, the vice president, Maddie, none of it. In fact, the only thing they find are saved birthday cards from someone named Jim. They decide to run the birthday cards for Prince, looking for a Jim or James, and hopefully this Jim or James can lead them to Pete. But it just doesn't make sense to them. They both feel like the White House knows something about Pete that makes him a suspect that they're just not telling them. They also feel like if the White House is wrong about Peter, then it puts Maddie in even greater danger because they're looking somewhere else. So they decide to look at this from different angles, going and paying a visit to New Leaf. The poor guy that is at the D.C. office is terrified when the Secret Service show up, asking him questions. But he does tell them that Maddie's teacher was, in fact, the leader of the D.C. chapter, that he had talked about bringing Maddie to one of their events. He knew that he was meeting with Maddie the previous night. But in terms of knowing where Maddie is, he has no idea. And as for the guy with the snake tattoo, his name's Mateo. He was dating Maddie's teacher, but he hadn't seen him in a while. So now Chelsea and Monks at least have a name to go off of. They both head back to the White House to debrief their bosses on what they found. And at the White House, Diane Farr is doing severe damage control, lying her ass off. The president corners her in a meeting and basically asks, how the hell did this happen? I mean, he was a suspect, then he escaped. And because of their strong previous history, the president believes her story, but it's just one lie on top of another. Diane then hears from Gordon Wick that she, himself, and the vice president need to have a covert meeting because Gordon Wick has gotten word from the kidnappers. Maddie is safe for now, but the kidnapper had videotaped her and then sent Gordon a list of demands. The vice president has 2 days to announce that he was the one behind the Metro bombing. He also has to admit who his accomplices were, and if he doesn't, Maddie dies. Gordon has no idea why he got the video or the list of demands, but he's looking into where exactly the email came from. The high-stakes situation caused a little bit of infighting. Tensions are high, but after thinking about it for a few seconds, the vice president says, I'll just confess. I mean, who's going to believe me anyway? I'm a distraught father. As soon as we get Maddie back, I deny the whole thing. But Diane shakes her head and says no. As soon as you announce that you were behind it, people start digging into that smoking gun and find all of the details. You're not giving in to these demands. I mean, even if we do get Maddie back, you can't control her. She was planning on taking you down. And then Diane goes into her car and grabs a duffel bag where she pulls out a nanny cam. She tells the vice president, you might want to go and take a look at what's on that thing. Because Maddie had told her therapist about it. Maddie was planning on showing this to the world, but her therapist gave me the heads up. I went and did damage control and cleaned up your mess once again. You're on the plane with the both of us, and I'm not letting you crash it to the ground. The vice president does go home and watch what's on the nanny cam, and he is mortified. It's a video from when Maddie was probably 13, 14 years old, and they're going to a function for her sister's charity. Her sister had tragically passed away, drowning accident. When it happened, the vice president, who was a widower at the time, blamed a very young Maddie, who was probably 7 years old, when in reality it was his fault because he wasn't watching the girls. The older Maddie got, the more she remembered about the actual situation, and she didn't want to live this lie anymore. But her dad got physically abusive, and the videotape shows it all. As for Diane, she just headed back up to her office where her and Ben were debriefed by Chelsea and Monks. And even though the clear lead here is the New Leaf connection with Mateo, Diane once again points them to finding Peter, harping on the fact that Sutherland is the one they need to find, and every second they don't spend searching for Peter is another second that is putting the vice president's daughter in danger. Once Diane sends Monks and Chelsea on their way, she does call Gordon Wick and debriefs him on exactly what they just told her. Gordon's never heard of a Mateo, but when she sends Gordon the sketch of Mateo, he recognizes him pretty quickly. Gordon, though, doesn't seem too concerned because he spends the rest of his night swimming in his very nice pool, but he gets a visitor. It's the female assassin, and she's back for revenge because Gordon has been ignoring her calls. So she puts a knife to his throat, and she's come looking for some answers. Gordon tells her that the situation right now is messy. Less contact, the better. She's not really interested, though, in his excuses, his explanations. She wants to know where Pete is. With that knife cutting his neck, he decides to make a deal with her. He tells her, I know where Maddie Sutherland's kidnappers' last known whereabouts are. You find him, you take care of him, and I'll locate Pete for you. She decides to accept this offer, and for the time being, Gordon Wick keeps his neck. Now, it took a little bit, but Rose was able to crack into the FBI database and look at the 12 suspects that Hawkins was looking into the week that he was murdered. There's really only 2, though, that fit the description of somebody who'd be working for Turn Lake. And one of those people suddenly passed away. In fact, he died the day before the FBI was going to show up and interview him. His name is Colin Worley, and there's basically nothing in his file. Not even a reason for his death. All of it is super shady, and they feel like Colin is definitely a missing link to this whole thing. But they have to find out exactly what Colin died from. If they can find out what he died from and connect all the dots, then it could be the first step in freeing Peter's name. In order to do that, though, they're going to have to visit the Office of Public Records, go inside, and request the file. They try to be as covert as possible about this, but They do steal a car from a local valet. Pete drops Rose off and she heads inside. But as Rose is trying to sweet talk the woman at the front desk into giving her the file without Rose handing over ID, Peter notices that a couple of guys across the street have clearly ID'd him. Pete waits as long as he can, but it gets to the point where he's got 4 guys approaching his vehicle and he has to take off. By the time that Rose comes out, she's looking for the car. It's nowhere to be found, but those 4 guys, they still are there. And they've got a phone pointed at Rose asking her questions. These guys are disciples of that internet conspiracy theory whack job that has put Pete's name on blast all over the country and has caused this quasi-witch hunt. Pete, however, shows up in the nick of time, fires a flare gun to scare them off, and then he and Rose get in the car and take off. They then head back to the houseboat. They're unaware, though, that Chelsea and Monks are onto them. Using the birthday cards, they were able to ID the guy named Jim. It's Peter's godfather. He was Peter's dad's best friend, but a difference of opinions kind of fractured the relationship between he and Pete. Problem is, he believed that Pete's dad leaked these classified documents, and Peter clearly didn't. And Jim used to be a journalist, so he did actually have the resources to look into this professionally. As for this whole crap with Peter kidnapping Maddie, though, he doesn't believe it for 1 second. Because he tells both Monks and Chelsea, Peter actually cares. It doesn't matter if they're friends or strangers. He cares about people. He wouldn't do such a thing. As for where Peter is, he doesn't know. But Chelsea and Monks continue to press him. And Jim says that he's got 2 places. There's an old place down in Shenandoah. And then there's the boat. They head to go see if Peter's down at the marina. And Peter is, in fact, down at the marina. He, along with Rose, are looking over Colin's file. And Colin's rap sheet does indicate that an OD, which is what he died from, would have been very plausible. He had a couple of court-appointed stints in rehab. All of his personal effects were forwarded to a next of kin. There's no name, but there is an address. One of those items was a key card to a company called Allentine Manufacturing. When Rose does a Google search of Allentine, she finds that they are a subsidiary Turn Lake Industries. Pete then flips over another page and he sees Colin's arrest photos, and Colin has a very distinctive snake tattoo. So Pete knows that Colin Worley is the bomber. The way that the two play it out, Turn Lake would have had every opportunity to kill somebody and get away with it. So Turn Lake hired Colin Worley, and then Turn Lake kills him to cover their tracks. They decide to go check out the P.O. box, find out who it belongs to, who this next of kin was. But as they leave, that's when Monks and Chelsea show up, and they place them under arrest. Now, as for Maddie, she's terrified. She's in a room that has a bright light, a bed, but that's it. The guy who kidnapped her, who we now know as Colin, won't really explain why he did what he did, which makes Maddie even more terrified. Maddie, though, might have a way out of this. She ends up kicking a hole in the wall, and she slowly starts digging at that hole, hoping that maybe she can burrow out of there. When Colin does show up, she just hides the hole with her bed. With Maddie having no idea what this guy's going to do or what's happening on the outside, she tries to keep herself alive by bargaining with this guy. She feels like this person is only holding her hostage because of something her father did. And it's not like she likes her dad. So she tells him about the nanny cam back at home that he can use to take down her father, the one that she was planning to use to take down her father. Colin, however, does look into it and finds out that the house that was storing the nanny cam was recently broken into, there was a murder, and all that was left was a stolen baby, of all things. And when Maddie hears that, she knows that she was betrayed by her therapist. She decides to just tell Colin what was on the videotape, but she also tells him that whatever he's planning, they can do it together. They can take this guy down. Colin thinks about it, gives her a, "we'll see," and then he leaves. And once he does, Maddie continues to go back to work trying to get the hell out of there. In episode 8, we get backstory on what happened with Colin Worley. The whole Mateo-Colin thing, it's not an accident. Mateo and Colin were actually identical twins. Colin was the one who dropped the bomb off at the location on the train. He was the one who was working for Turn Lake Industries. He was also the one who was a drug addict. When he came home after dropping off the package on the train, he was on edge because it didn't go off and he had just been attacked by Peter, narrowly getting away. He opens his door and there's his twin brother Mateo because he had just gotten kicked out of his house via his girlfriend. Colin tried to explain to Mateo, dude, you got to get out of here, but Mateo wasn't getting the message. Colin called up Gordon Wick, explained what happened with the package, and Gordon said, don't worry, we're going to fix it. And his idea of fixing it the next day was to kill Mateo. It was a complete accident, though. Gordon's goons thought that they were killing Colin. It's a misunderstanding because they're identical twins. They set it up to look like it was a drug overdose. So when Colin came home and saw the scene, he realized pretty quickly that this was a setup by Gordon and Turn Lake Industries. He immediately went into damage control. He swapped IDs with Mateo and then decided to assume Mateo's identity. So while the world thinks that it's Mateo who's running amok, in reality, it's Colin, who was pronounced dead months ago. Of course, Peter and Rose, they don't know any of this. All they know is that Colin Worley is their bomber. They were on the way to that P.O. box when they were caught by Chelsea and Monks, and right away they explain to them that they're innocent. They don't have Maddie, and they've been able to crack this thing wide open, and they have proof. Now, at first, Chelsea and Monks don't believe a word these two say, but when they look at their, quote, evidence, and they see Colin's picture, they recognize it. They suddenly get a little bit curious. It's not like they believe Peter and Rose 100%, but they're willing at least to follow them down the rabbit hole. Monks and Chelsea take Rose and Peter into the houseboat, and they have them explain exactly what they've found about the city blocks, about the target, everything. Rose, however, notices that Monks and Chelsea keep looking back and forth with each other like some of this sounds familiar, and it causes Chelsea to come clean by showing them a picture of Mateo's sketch. Peter's a little confused because Colin died, and that's when Chelsea tells him that he goes by Mateo now. The whole situation's confusing because Colin's body had no visible tattoos. Mateo has this snake tattoo. And that's when, looking into the file a little bit more, they realize that Colin and Mateo are twin brothers. Even though Chelsea and Monks were instructed to bring these two in, they decide to go with their gut, heading to that P.O. box and investigating it a little bit more. While they head over there, Gordon Wick gets once again another message from Colin. This time, it's a video of Maddie explaining that if the vice president doesn't come clean in the next 2 hours, she's going to die. Unlike the first time, though, Gordon and Diane decide not to show the vice president this. Instead, they just tell him there is no update, but the fact there's no update leads the vice president to want to come clean. Diane hammers home the point, though, that he's not doing it. They've discussed it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. But the vice president doesn't want to risk losing his only remaining family member, his only remaining daughter. He tells Diane, I'm not going to be the father that was on that nanny cam. Not anymore. Gordon decides to step in and, trying to put the vice president's mind at ease, he tells him, I have somebody looking into this. They have a lead. They're motivated to end it quickly. They should be able to get Maddie back pretty soon. If we can stall the kidnapper. But the vice president jumps in and says, wait, how do you know it's just one kidnapper? And once again, they sent the video just to you. You know this person, don't you? Gordon then reveals that he does know who it is. It's the guy who tried to do the metro bombing for them. They thought they killed him, but instead they obviously neutralized his brother. Tensions get high, then they calm down. It ends with the vice president leaving the room just saying, get her home safely soon, please. When he does leave, though, both Gordon and Diane know they have a problem, and it is the vice president. So Diane asks Gordon, your associate, are they just looking into Colin? And Gordon knows what she means. She means that maybe he add on a little bit more to this to-do list. Maybe he add on the vice president. Later that day, both Diane and the vice president meet up in the White House. There's a meeting on Omar Zadar with the president, and both Diane and the vice president are supposed to be in it. But when the vice president stops by Diane's office to walk and talk over to the meeting, Diane tells him that's not supposed to start for a few hours. And the vice president tells her it got rescheduled, but Diane got nothing about it, which is super weird. When they arrive at the room where the meeting is to take place, one of the president's staffers steps in and won't let Diane in the room, telling her that the president has requested she focus on an upcoming meeting with a Representative Hawkins. The Hawkins meeting seems like complete crap. On top of it, this staffer won't even let Diane in to see the president, speak to her. Nothing. Diane just tells the staffer, "Tell the president I need 5 minutes when she's done." And she begrudgingly heads off to go meet with this representative from Texas. In the actual Zadar meeting, they're discussing whether or not the United States will support him in his upcoming election. He's got to make some concessions to do so, but if he makes these concessions, then the United States will put their backing behind him. And it's something the vice president just can't wrap his head around. He can't believe they're even entertaining this idea because as he screams at everybody, "This guy's a terrorist. What are we doing?" This little outburst leads the president to dismiss everybody in the room except the vice president, where she has a candid one-on-one with him and tells him, "Why don't you take a couple days? I mean, you're clearly on edge with everything going on with Maddie." But the vice president tells her sitting at home and just waiting would make the situation so much worse for him. Somehow in the conversation, the vice president is able to bring up Diane naturally, which leads him to ask, "Yeah, where is she today?" Knowing that she wasn't admitted access to the meeting. And the president reveals to the vice president that she's thinking about making a change in the West Wing. And the change would be her old buddy, Diane Farr. Now, while everybody at the White House is discussing Zadar, Chelsea, Monks, Pete, Rose, they all head over to this P.O. box to figure out if they can get a lead on where Mateo/Colin is. The P.O. box leads them to a storage unit. But at the storage unit, Monks finds a pay stub for Colin, and he wants to go question the employer. Because of that, Monks and Chelsea are going to have to split up. So Monks takes Rose, and Chelsea hangs back at the storage facility with Pete. It's becoming more and more clear to Chelsea that Pete actually didn't have anything to do with this. And Pete once again asks her, "Tell me, who were you protecting the day of the Metro bombing? If I know, maybe it'll give us a hint as to what we're dealing with." So finally, after a little more pressure, Chelsea reveals who she was protecting. It was Zadar. There was a secret meeting set up. He was in the country. No one was supposed to know about it, but he was there for a few hours. And if the target truly was Zadar, then it makes a lot of sense. Because if a couple people in the government wanted to kill Zadar, just himself, that would make waves. You might be looking at a war. But if it's set up as a terrorist attack and he just happens to be one of the casualties, then that doesn't really bring up any red flags. As they're figuring this out, Chelsea gets a video message from a number that she doesn't recognize, and it's a video of Maddie. The 2 hours that Maddie had given her father to come clean were up. In a last-ditch effort, Maddie told Mateo/Colin, "Let me text my dad. I'll make a video, I'll plead to him, and I can get him to do what you want." Instead of texting her dad this message, though, she gave Colin/Mateo Chelsea's number. And in the video, which seems on the surface to be nothing more than, "Hey, please come clean, they're about to kill me," there is a hidden message. Certain words, Maddie touches her necklace. Both Chelsea and Pete pick up on this, and when they write it all down, it translates to train R142. That's the only thing that Maddie knows about her location. She kept digging in the wall until she got to a point where there was a box and written on it was R142. She could hear train, so she just figured that that would be some information that Chelsea could use to find her location. At first, Chelsea wants to send this information to people in the White House, but Pete convinces her not to do that because they don't know who they can trust. They can figure this out on their own. They start hopping on Google, searching train, searching the number sequence, everything, but nothing's really popping up. They then, however, get a lead from Monks. They were able to track down the last 3 employers for Worley. And when you put all their locations in, you get a perfect triangle. And in the middle of that triangle is a shipping container yard. Now, both Chelsea and Pete think they have a pretty good idea of where Maddie's being kept. They tell Monks to meet them over there. And when they arrive, Chelsea has no problem putting on a bulletproof vest and giving one to Pete, along with a gun. They then start walking through the yard gingerly, trying to find Maddie. But Colin/Mateo, he had thought of this. So he put up security camera footage that was motion detected. He gets an alert on his phone telling him that there are visitors, and he frantically runs back to the shipping container that he's keeping Maddie in. But Maddie wasn't about to wait for someone to save her. She took matters into her own hands. She knocked over the light that was kept in the storage facility, broke off a piece of it, and attacked Colin with it. She then fled out of the storage facility, having no idea that Chelsea and Pete were looking for her, and she was just trying to get away from Colin. Maddie ends up running into Chelsea's arms. Pete ends up taking Colin down and arresting him. At this point, it's just Pete, Chelsea, and Monks. Rose was left in the car because Monks figured that she couldn't really help with anything. They start escorting Colin out of the shipping yard when all of a sudden Monks notices that there's a sniper perched above them. The sniper is that female assassin who was able to hunt Colin down. And in fact, the first person she kills is Colin, so Pete isn't going to be able to get his side of the story. The shooting, though, has Maddie injured. She got hit with some shrapnel, so she's having trouble walking. And then Monks gets hit by the sniper. Pete would have been next, but Rose, who had heard the commotion, wasn't about to sit back and let other people fight her battles. She climbed up and threw the female assassin down to the ground, killing her. Unfortunately, though, Monks loses his life. In episode 9, in the immediate aftermath, Peter starts looking over Colin's body for anything he can find that might be of use, and Rose does the same thing with the female assassin. She finds the assassin's phone. Right after she does find it, it starts ringing, and it's Gordon Wick looking for an update. Rose fakes it, and Gordon can't tell, but Rose isn't quite convincing enough. Gordon starts getting suspicious, and he's able to figure out that the person on the other end of the cell phone is not the person he called, and he hangs up. They both then go run over to tell Chelsea that they got to get out of there because they can hear police sirens in the background, and they know it's only a matter of time before the police show up and take them in. But Chelsea refuses to. She's not leaving her partner behind. Maddie's also pretty upset. She's got shrapnel in her leg, and she asks all three of them, is it true what he said about my dad, about being involved in the Metro bombing? And Pete does not pull any punches and just says, yeah, he was involved. He was trying to kill Omar Zadar, but your dad isn't the only one involved. It's also Diane Farr and Gordon Wick. And they're planning another attack, and if we don't stop it in the next 24 hours, then more people are going to die. Maddie actually steps up and says, I can help. I mean, if I'm rescued, the president's going to want to talk to me. Question is, who can I trust? Pete likes the idea. He tells Maddie that she can trust President Travers. And even though he's hesitant to tell her she can trust Ben Almora, Chelsea says that she can. They then devise a plan where Peter and Rose are going to go off and try to get proof that Diane and the vice president had their fingerprints all over the Metro bombing. Chelsea is going to stay with Maddie. If they do find this proof, they're going to have to wait for Chelsea to reach out to them because the Secret Service is going to take her phone. Peter and Rose then run off. Chelsea and Maddie get their story straight. And shortly after getting into police custody, Chelsea and Maddie get escorted over to the vice president's house. Diane's the one who actually breaks the news to the vice president, along with Gordon Wick, who's in the room as well, that Maddie's been found. But she also breaks the news that 3 people were found dead. Colin Worley, Eric Monks, and some unidentified female. And Diane turns to Gordon Wick and says, I'm sorry for your loss, because she knows that it was his assassin. This situation has officially become a mess. Diane Farr's patience has run thin, and she asks Gordon Wick, where are we on tomorrow? Because tomorrow is the make good on the attack of Omar Zadar. Zadar is going to fly into the country, and they're planning to attack him and kill him as soon as he lands. Gordon assures the room that the plan is still on, everything should run smoothly. Diane's a little skeptical on that, and it's because so far these plans haven't worked. Now, it's worth mentioning that one of the reasons why Diane probably has had it up to here with Gordon Wick and all of this is because she actually wasn't in on the original planning to kill Omar Zadar. She was brought in after the fact. Late at night, after the Metro bombing, she was called by the vice president, and the vice president was with Gordon Wick, and they explained their plan to kill Omar Zadar. They brought Diane into it because they figured that if an investigation were to go down and people on the president's cabinet were called up to the Hill to testify, it wouldn't be good for the administration. And they knew that Diane Farr had such a loyalty to the president for all of the years they spent together. So Diane really was brought in to clean up their mess. And at this point, she's just flat out had enough. It seems like they're going to be at the finish line soon, but what she wants to do in the meantime is find out what Chelsea and Maddie know. Diane's going to lead up Chelsea's debriefing, and she instructs the vice president to find out what he can regarding Maddie's mental state. While those three wait for Chelsea and Maddie to show up, Pete knew that he needed a friend at that moment. With his face plastered all over the news, he was limited on where he could go, and he decided to go to his uncle's place. Luckily for Pete, his uncle truly doesn't believe that he had anything to do with Maddie's kidnapping, so he's more than willing to bring him into his house. This little respite allows Rose to try to crack into the female assassin's phone and find out any information she can. While she starts looking in the phone, Pete starts showing the dossier of all the information they've collected regarding the situation to his uncle, who, once again, is a former journalist, so he might be able to connect some dots that Pete wasn't able to. This, however, sparks an argument regarding their original falling out. Pete's uncle writing that article on his dad, Pete not taking too kindly to it, and it gets broken up when Rose enters the room and says, "I cracked the phone." She found photos of her aunt, her uncle, the code names, all of that. But there are also pictures from the night action room. Pete recognizes it. Looking at the metadata, they're able to discern exactly when those photos were taken, and Pete remembers that he called out sick that day. Diane said that she would find someone to fill in. But now what they need to do is find out exactly who was in the room when those pictures were taken. And you have to scan in to get into the night action room, and those scans are kept on file. The good thing is that the only person who can change the logs and change who was in and out is Ben Almora. The bad news is you have to request those logs, and that means you have to be in the Secret Service. Chelsea might be able to do it, but they're waiting on Chelsea's phone call, and they don't want to wait any longer. So they're going to have to find somebody who can request the logs, and red flags won't go up. They decide to go with Diane Farr's assistant. They collect all their stuff, they get ready to leave. Peter's Uncle Jim is going to head down to his office and poke around, see if he can find out any information now that he has stuff to go on. And he tells him, if you find out anything else, send it my way. They then have a little bit of an awkward goodbye that involves a handshake, not a hug. And then Peter and Rose head to go stake out the apartment of Diane's assistant. While they're sitting in their car, Maddie has arrived back at home. When they finally get some privacy, Chelsea tells Maddie that the last time Zadar was in the country, the president gave him Secret Service detail. So if Zadar is the target, then the president would give him Secret Service detail again. Now she just has to find out who is on his detail and warn them about this impending attack. Problem is, she doesn't have her cell phone. And Maddie remembers that she has an old cell phone in the house. She just has to get it. As they're talking, though, there's a knock at the door, and it's the vice president and one of the higher-ups in the Secret Service. Normally, Ben Almora would be there to debrief, but he's not. He's on, quote, vacation. So unfortunately for Chelsea, it's going to be this dude that she doesn't really know, FBI Director Witt, and Diane Farr. While Chelsea's getting debriefed, the vice president is basically debriefing Maddie, trying to get any information he can on what she might know about the situation. And she does a really good job. She does tell her dad that this guy said he was behind the Metro bombing, but she also plays it off like she doesn't believe any of it. Now, in the other room, Chelsea's doing the same thing, and she also reveals to this trio about Colin Worley demanding that the vice president take accountability for the Metro bombing. And this is the first time that Director Witt has heard about this. Even though it does sound crazy, he does want to look into it, which is the last thing that Diane Farr needs. She tries to divert Witt's attention, saying that really shouldn't be a priority. I mean, this dude was delusional. But Witt reminds her that Worley was a suspect in the Metro bombing before he died, so he's interested to hear anything he has to say on the matter. Once Chelsea's let go from the debriefing, she goes to get her gun and badge back, but she also goes to find out who is on Zadar's detail. She asks one of the Secret Service agents if he can go look into the matter of her gun and badge, which opens up his computer. And when Chelsea looks into it, she finds that Ben Almora isn't on vacation. He's at Camp David. She then goes to Zadar's code name, and it just says that he's somewhere called Blair House. She doesn't really get a chance to dive too deep into it because Secret Service agent, along with the guy who was in her debriefing, come back, and Chelsea has to get up before she's caught. The whole time that Chelsea was away from Maddie, the vice president was, quote, protecting Maddie, making sure that his daughter was okay, but also just trying to spend a little time with her. He's realized that he's been a bad father. But at one point in the night, Maddie dozes off. And that's when Diane Farr comes to the room and tells the vice president, "I need to talk to you." The thing is, Maddie didn't actually doze off. With her dad finally out of the room, Maddie feels like this is a pretty good time to go get that cell phone. Diane wants to know from the vice president what Maddie knew. He fills her in, And then he asks Diane about Chelsea, and she fills the vice president in on how that debriefing went and how now they have Willits looking into stuff. Diane tells the vice president that she'll once again clean up his mess because Diane still thinks she's in charge. But once she leaves the room, the vice president calls up Gordon Wick and says, "Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm on board. There's one condition. She's my daughter. I'll get her in line." He then starts talking about if, in a worst-case scenario, he'll just start issuing pardons the next night. This entire conversation is being overheard by Maddie, who was returning from grabbing her cell phone from the basement. And it's definitely got her curious as to what her father is up to. Maddie doesn't want to get caught, so she sneaks back to her room. But the problem is she left a clue that she had left her room. There was a little bit of blood on the banister that when the vice president finally exited the room that he was in, he noticed it. So while she's suspicious of her father is now suspicious of her. Now that Maddie has a cell phone, her and Chelsea use it to get in contact with Peter. Peter and Rose were able to get the jump on Diane's assistant, going into her apartment, duct taping her, and using her computer to get the access logs to figure out who was the one who got into the night action room the night that those pictures were taken. Sure enough, it was Diane Farr. As soon as they get this information, Peter tells Rose, "Send that to my Uncle Jim." And then he gets a phone call, and it's from Chelsea. He excitedly tells her that they found the information they needed that links Farr to the deaths of Rose's aunt and uncle. He then asks for an update on whether or not Chelsea's been able to get in touch with the president or Almora, and she tells him no. They went to Camp David on a last-minute trip, and Zadara's detail has him at a place called the Blair House, but she knows for a fact that Blair House doesn't have any plans for anyone to be there that week. Through talking it out, Chelsea realizes that must mean Zadar is headed to Camp David. At first, she doesn't think that there's any chance that anyone would put the president's life at risk, and that's when Maddie speaks up and says, "I heard my dad talking about handing out pardons tomorrow night. The only person who can hand out a pardon is the president." This really doesn't come as a surprise to either Peter or Rose. They found an email detailing how Diane was disinvited from the Zadar meeting, so they feel like the president might have been on to what Diane was up to, and she was keeping her out of the loop, and one of the ways she did so was by changing this meeting. Chelsea also thinks it makes sense because, as she puts it, Ben Almora must have put two and two together when he showed up on campus that day asking about who she was guarding the day of the Metro bombing. Now they have to figure out a way to stop this. When Peter hangs up the phone, he tells Rose, "There's only one person I know that can call this off, and it's Diane Farr." So those two head over to Farr's apartment to wait her out. Meanwhile, Chelsea is still calling Ben Almora, but he's not picking up. She doesn't get a chance to game plan on how to get in touch with the president before the vice president enters the room and tells both Chelsea and Maddie, "You guys are coming to Camp David. The president wants to talk to you, and you have to come too." And knowing what they know about this possible attack of Zadar, neither of them are too thrilled to get the invite, but they also don't really have a choice. The next day, when they get on the helicopter, one thing that Chelsea finds really interesting is these two guys also get on. And Chelsea's never seen them before, and they're both carrying these big cases that look pretty important. Meanwhile, over at Diane's place, she enters in the wee hours of the morning because she had stayed up all night long waiting for the confirmation that Omar Zadar was killed, putting an end to all of this, but she never got it. And when she never got it, she panicked. She went to her safe, she grabbed her cash, her passport. She was planning on fleeing the country. And as she was packing, she heard footsteps behind her, and she just figured that it must have been Gordon Wick's hit person. So she's pretty surprised when she turns around, and it's Peter. Peter demands that Diane call the attack off, put an end to all of this. The thing is, Diane tells Peter, "I don't know anything about this assassination attempt." And Peter thinks she's bluffing again. He starts talking about this assassination attempt on the president, and that's when Diane really gets concerned. She tells Peter, "I really don't know anything. Gordon Wick, the vice president, they shut me out. But if the president's in danger, I have to protect them." Those two took advantage of the fact that they knew I would never put Michelle's life at risk. She tries to get in touch with the president, calling her, but there's no answer. Even though they don't want to, they all need each other in this moment, and all three of them are heading to Camp David to hopefully call this attack off. And in the season finale, on the way over to Camp David, Diane Farr just reiterates that she doesn't know about this attack. She also once again says she had nothing to do with the Metro bombing. And when Pete asks her, why me? I mean, why did you put me on night action? She has the audacity to tell him, well, I thought I could trust you. And Pete knows the real reason is because if things ever hit the fan, Diane would have the perfect fall guy in Pete. But she also knew that she had the perfect worker in Pete. As for why she ordered the hit on the Campbells, she tells him that if President Travers never ordered a night action, none of this would have happened. But after the government found out that the Campbells had met with Zadar, they figured that it was likely they told him that he was the actual target the day of the Metro bombing. At that point, the investigation had to be shut down. While they're driving over to Camp David, Chelsea, Maddie, the vice president, and these couple of random new Secret Service agents are flying over to Camp David in the presidential helicopter. Just to give them a little bit of a test, Chelsea starts asking where some of the members of the Secret Service are, members that have been in the Secret Service for years. And these guys don't pass that test. So it's obvious to Chelsea that these guys probably aren't actually Secret Service. As soon as the helicopter touches down, the vice president grabs his daughter and tells Maddie, the president wants to see you. And Maddie wants to stay with Chelsea, but the vice president says, oh, the president will talk to Chelsea later. Chelsea, who overhears this conversation, is now in panic mode. She knows that whatever those guys were carrying on the helicopter wasn't good news. Now the vice president is trying to split her and Maddie up. She has to do something. She goes up to one of the Secret Service agents and says, I have to get in touch with Almora, but he informs her that communications are down at the moment. Before they actually split for good, Chelsea is able to tell Maddie, as soon as you get to the president, warn her right away. But Maddie never gets the opportunity because the vice president takes his daughter along with another fake Secret Service agent, and they go down in a secret tunnel. The only way to access it is through a trap door in the wall, and you have to use a code to get in. When they get down to this bunker, Maddie knows that this is where they'll be when they try to kill the president, and she doesn't want any parts of it. The vice president tries to explain his side of things, saying that President Travers was about to get in bed with a terrorist. He wasn't about to let that happen. He couldn't. It was his duty as vice president to do something. And this was, unfortunately, the only option. For Maddie, it's unfortunate because her options are go upstairs and possibly die or sit in this underground bunker and wait for explosions. Unbeknownst to Maddie, help is on the way. Diane was able to sneak Peter and Rose into Camp David. They had to hide in the trunk to do so. And the first person that Diane Farr finds is Ben. He wants to know what the hell she's doing there because she's not supposed to be there. And she doesn't explain anything. She just says, I have to talk to POTUS right away. As Almora and Farr head inside to argue, Pete pops his head up and notices that there are no Secret Service detail anywhere around, which means the president isn't there. They start to get out of the car to go try to find the president, warn her like that, when they hear a gunshot. That's because inside, as Diane was trying to tell Ben that there is a bomb on the property, they have to get in touch with the president's Secret Service detail. One of Wick's guys shows up, notices Diane Farr, and shoots her. It's not fatal, but then he shoots Ben Almora, and that one is fatal. Upon hearing the gunshot, Peter runs in, and he tries to catch the guy, but he's unable to. Wick's henchman did end up getting a positive ID on Peter, so now, all of Wick's men on the property know that Peter and Rose are there. As they're trying to plan their next step, Diane, who's badly injured, tells both of them that there's a communications building on the center of the property. Everything at Camp David runs through there. Wick would know to hit it. But Rose thinks that maybe she can fix it with her cybersecurity background. So that's where Peter and Rose head. As they head out to go try and fix this communications problem, Chelsea gets to work. She's basically been sequestered by one of these faux Secret Service agents. But after hearing that guy talk on a radio, she knows that she's got to jump to action before it's too late. She does so by disarming him, knocking him out, and stealing his radio. As soon as she escapes the room that she was basically held prisoner in, she starts looking for what the guy brought off the plane, that black box. The only issue is she doesn't have a lot of time. This attack is going to go down in 10 minutes. She saw the guy set his watch. So she's basically got 10 minutes to find this box or warn the president, or both. As Chelsea looks up and down for this box, Rose and Pete have made their way to the communications building, where they encountered yet another one of Wick's henchmen. Luckily, Pete knows how to handle himself. He knocked him out, and Rose is able to get to work on getting the communications back up. Just like Chelsea, though, Peter and Rose also know that they're on borrowed time, because they were able to grab one of the radios that Wick's men are using, so they're kind of on the inside. They know that the attack is going to go down in 4 minutes. But Peter can't wait around for Rose to work some computer magic. He leaves her there and goes and tries to stop it on his own. So Rose is working on communications. Peter is trying to warn the president. Chelsea's looking for a bomb. And Maddie has had enough. She just flat out tells her dad, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to put on a smile, act like everything's okay. I'm not going to be your little puppet. I'm leaving. And the vice president tries to explain to her once again that it's of the utmost importance she stay where she is. It's a matter of literal life and death, but she doesn't want to do it. So begrudgingly, the vice president says, okay, let her out. But he knows full well that once they let her out of that bunker and she tries to make her way back upstairs, she's not going to actually be able to get out. So he's basically letting her out to her death. Hey, all for the greater good, right? But Maddie Redfield always has her guardian angel looking out for her because Chelsea Arrington is able to locate the bomb. She's able to clear out the entire lodge where it was being held, and thanks to the fact that Rose was able to get the communications back up, Chelsea then grabs a radio and warns the president's detail that there's a bomb and they need to get out, divert. So in a matter of 3 minutes, Chelsea was able to find that bomb, save the president, and to complete the trifecta, she hears somebody screaming for help and she recognizes the voice, and she narrowly is able to punch in the code and get Maddie out of the bunker in time, saving her life as well. They're not out of the woods quite yet, because Gordon Wick and his people, they had planned for possibly this situation. They have a contingency plan. And they start talking about it on the radio, and Peter hears it. So he heads to the helicopter. The same helicopter that the vice president landed on, that's the same helicopter they're going to evacuate the president on. But one of those black boxes was left on the helicopter. And Pete figures that that's the case. Peter runs as fast as he can, and he gets to the helicopter just before the president is ushered on. And he basically takes the president prisoner. He puts a gun to the president's back, telling everybody there that he doesn't want to hurt anyone, but they have to check the helicopter for a bomb. Everybody is very suspicious of the crazy guy who was wanted for kidnapping and now has the president at gunpoint. But before he can get his head blown off by a sniper, they do what he asks. They check the helicopter, and after a thorough sweep, they're able to locate the bomb and everybody exits, but the helicopter blows up. Initially, Peter is arrested, but all of this is cleared up when Chelsea and Maddie show up and say, let that guy go. He's not a criminal, he's a hero. The criminals in all this, they end up spending some time in jail. The vice president is definitely surprised when he finds out that the bombs did go off, but Maddie survived. And with her testimony, he's not going to be vice president anymore. Diane Farr can also kiss her career goodbye. She's going to be spending a lot of time in prison. The only one that seemingly got away with this was Gordon Wick, who is still on the run. When all the dust settles and everything kind of goes back to normal, the president really wants to thank both Peter and Rose for what they did, not just for herself, but for the country. But Peter and Rose don't want that. They don't want a public display. They'd rather just hide off in the shadows and not be known. President completely understands that, and she asks them, okay, well, what can I do for you? And Peter has one request. He really wants to know what happened with his father. So the president grants that request by showing him the testimony of Peter's dad, testimony that's never been seen before. And in that testimony, Peter's dad admits to being coerced by foreign agents into committing espionage. It's pretty upsetting for Peter. It's not what he wanted, that's for sure. But he does tell the president afterwards, thank you, because what I didn't like was thinking that my dad was innocent and he never got a chance to actually clear his name. Now at least I know the truth. But the president does reveal quite a twist to this whole thing. She tells Peter that in reality, his dad did commit espionage, but he was being debriefed on that tape because they were going to make him a double agent. He was going to be once again working for the good guys. But foreign assassins got word of it and they killed him. That will never get out to the public. The story is that he died in a car accident, but in reality, He did die trying to make right on what he did. The president then decides to change topics by telling Peter that she feels like he's been wasting away in the basement. What she wants to do is make him a night agent. That's a job that Peter jumps at. But Peter isn't the only one getting a promotion. Chelsea also goes in, and she meets with the new head of the Secret Service, the guy who took over for Ben Almora. The first thing he does is ask her if she wants to speak at Eric Monks' memorial service, and she agrees. And then he asks her, when you're ready to come back, the president wants you on her detail. She asks for you personally. And that is a chance that Chelsea jumps at. She still, however, has stayed in touch with Maddie. Maddie's planning on living her life like she wanted to, going off, studying abroad, and just being normal. But normal is the farthest thing from what Peter will now be. He goes to his first day on the night action job. He kisses Rose goodbye. He gets on a plane, and once they're out of U.S. airspace, he opens up his debriefing. And that is the end of Season 1 of The Night Agent. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash the thumbs down button if it sucked. I have Patreons. I have merch. Buy a t-shirt. Buy a hoodie. And for God's sake, be nice in the comments section. All right? Nasty comments make me feel bad. But I do appreciate you watching at least.